Every artist has that one album. The one that was supposed to cement their legacy. The one the world was waiting for. And instead, it changed everything. Not in the way they planned. Sometimes it's a commercial disaster. Sometimes it's a critical embarrassment. Sometimes it's just a betrayal of what made people fall in love with them in the first place. These are the albums that didn't just underperform. They shifted trajectories, damaged reputations, and in some cases, ended eras that felt untouchable. Michael Jackson, Invincible, 21. Michael Jackson hadn't released an album of entirely new material in a decade when Invincible arrived in 2001. The pressure was enormous, and the album itself wasn't bad. It debuted at #1 and moved over 360,000 copies in its first week. But by Michael Jackson's standards, that wasn't enough. The real damage came from what happened around it. Jackson and Sony were at war behind the scenes. Sony pulled promotion almost immediately after Jackson announced he wouldn't be renewing his contract. No tour followed. Barely any music videos. The label and the artist essentially abandoned the project at the same time. The result? The most expensive album ever made, reportedly costing close to $30 million, became his last studio album of new material, not because of the music, but because the machinery around it collapsed completely. Invincible didn't end Michael Jackson's career, it ended his relationship with the music industry, and he never fully recovered that working foundation again. Beyoncé, 4, 2011. Coming off I Am, Sasha Fierce, Beyoncé had built one of the most commercially bulletproof careers in music. Then came 4. The album debuted at #1, but with 310,000 first-week sales, it was her lowest charting debut ever. Its lead single, Run the World, peaked at #29 on the Hot 100. The first time a Beyoncé lead single had missed the top 10. Critics respected the artistic ambition, but audiences weren't connecting the way they used to. What makes 4 interesting on this list is what it triggered. It forced Beyoncé to completely rethink her strategy. The result was the surprise self-titled album in 2013, released with no warning, no singles, no promotional campaign. A total reinvention of how a pop album could be launched. 4 didn't destroy Beyoncé, it humbled her enough to make her dangerous again. Lady Gaga, Art Pop, 2013. After the fame and Born This Way, Lady Gaga felt genuinely untouchable. Art Pop changed that perception almost overnight. The album debuted at #1 with 258,000 copies. But that was a fraction of what Born This Way had done, and Interscope had reportedly spent millions expecting a much bigger return. Rumors circulated that the label took significant financial losses, with staff redundancies following. Gaga later said the whole industry turned its back on her during the ART pop cycle. She fired her longtime manager a week before the album dropped. She publicly admitted it sent her into a deep depression by the end of 2013. What followed was a strategic retreat, jazz albums with Tony Bennett, a Sound of Music medley at the Oscars to remind people she could actually sing, a slow, careful rebuilding of public goodwill. It took years, and it worked eventually, but Art Pop remains the moment the invincibility cracked. Katy Perry, Witness, 2017. After Teenage Dream and Prism, Katy Perry was one of the biggest pop artists in the world. Witness was supposed to continue that run. Instead, it became a case study in how badly a pop rebrand can go. The lead single changed, the rhythm was divisive. The rollout felt confused. The album debuted far below her previous numbers. And critically, it was savaged as hollow and commercially calculated. But it didn't stop there. The decline continued with Smile, which performed even worse. Then with Woman's World, one of her most recent releases, the internet reacted with near universal mockery. A song attempting to sound empowering that landed as tone-deaf and embarrassing. Each album since Witness has confirmed the same thing. The audience Katy Perry built during her peak has moved on, and she hasn't found a new one to replace them. Kesha, Rainbow, 2017. Rainbow should have been one of the great comeback stories. After years of highly publicized legal battles with her former producer, Kesha returned with an album that was raw, emotional, and critically praised. The reviews were strong. The cultural moment was there. But the commercial performance was sobering. For an artist of her profile, with that level of public attention and goodwill behind her, Rainbow didn't translate into the mainstream comeback the moment deserved. The industry had moved on during her legal battles. Her lane in pop had been filled. And despite the genuine power of the music, she's never fully reclaimed the commercial footing she had before everything fell apart. Kanye West, Donda, 2021. Donda didn't just underperform, it became a symbol of an artist losing the plot in real time. Multiple stadium listening parties, a release date announced during the NBA Finals, Kanye sleeping inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the album delayed over and over and over again, before eventually leaking out in chaotic, unfinished form. When it finally arrived, Donda was 27 tracks long and felt less like a finished album and more like a hard drive of ideas that never got edited. The rollout became more memorable than the music. And the bigger problem was what it confirmed. That Kanye's behavior, which had been escalating for years, was now impossible to separate from the art. The circus around Donda made it harder for even his most loyal supporters to take him seriously as a functioning artist. It was the beginning of the end of the goodwill. Everything that followed made that worse. Taylor Swift, Lover, 2019. This one needs context. Lover was not a flop by normal standards. It sold 3.2 million copies in 2019 and made Taylor the best-selling artist of the year globally. But by Taylor Swift standards, coming off the blockbuster Reputation era, with a massive new label deal and all the momentum in the world, the reception was underwhelming. The lead single, Me, was widely mocked as juvenile. The rollout felt scattered. Critically, the album was considered her weakest in years. More importantly, Lover produced no enduring cultural moment at the time of release. No single dominated. No era defined itself. The irony is that Cruel Summer, buried on the album, eventually became one of her biggest songs ever, years later, after the Eras tour, which proved the album had more in it than people gave it credit for. But in 2019, Lover felt like a stumble, and Taylor knew it. Folklore arrived less than a year later, a complete artistic pivot that silenced every critic almost immediately. Lorde, Solar Power, 2021. Melodrama was a generational album, critically adored, Grammy-nominated for Album of the Year. The kind of record that sets an almost impossible standard for whatever comes next. Solar Power came next. It debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 with just 56,000 units, nearly half of what Melodrama opened with. The lead single failed to chart meaningfully. A viral TikTok compared it to background music for a women's shaving commercial. Brutal. The problem wasn't just the music, it was the mismatch between what fans expected and what Lorde wanted to make. People wanted dark, emotional, sonically complex pop. They got a breezy, sun-drenched folk album about logging off and going outside. Solar Power didn't end Lorde's career, but it fundamentally changed how people viewed her commercial trajectory. The question of whether she can return to melodrama-level cultural relevance remains genuinely unanswered. Dua Lipa, Radical Optimism, 2024. After Future Nostalgia made Dua Lipa one of the most dominant pop artists on the planet, Radical Optimism had everything going for it. But the album landed without the impact anyone expected. The singles didn't cut through the way Future Nostalgia's had. The critical response was warm but not rapturous, and commercially it felt like a step down from the momentum she'd built. It's not a disaster, but for an artist at her level, with that level of expectation, underwhelming is its own kind of damage. The pressure is now firmly on her next record to prove whether Future Nostalgia was the peak or just the beginning. Camila Cabello, Si, Exoxo dos Cero dos Cuatro. Si, XOXO was supposed to be a reinvention. After the mixed reception to her earlier albums, Camila went experimental, drawing from hyperpop, reggaeton, and left-field production choices that felt genuinely surprising for her. But the album landed with almost no cultural traction. The singles didn't connect. The aesthetic felt uncertain rather than bold. And the critical response was indifferent at best. Si, XOXO raised a question that's now hard to avoid. Has Camila Cabello permanently lost her grip on mainstream pop? She debuted with massive momentum from Fifth Harmony. That momentum is now a distant memory. Halsey, If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power, 2021. Halsey made one of the most genuinely bold artistic moves of her career with this album. Produced by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, industrial, dark, completely uncommercial, and critically one of her best reviewed projects. But the label essentially buried it. No real radio push. No mainstream promotional support. The album was too weird for the audience Halsey had built, and the label wasn't willing to build a new one around it. The result was an album that should have expanded her artistic credibility, and instead accelerated her exit from mainstream relevance. It's one of the clearest recent examples of an artist outgrowing their lane and the industry refusing to follow them there. Charli XCX, Sucker, 2014. Before Brat made Charli XCX one of the coolest artists alive, there was Sucker. Her major label debut was a commercial disappointment. The singles didn't break through. The pop-punk aesthetic felt slightly out of step, and the label lost faith in her as a mainstream pop act. What makes this story different is the ending. That commercial failure forced Charli off the traditional pop path entirely, into experimental mixtapes, cult followings, and eventually the kind of artistic credibility that led directly to BRT. Sucker flopping might be the best thing that ever happened to her career. Miley Cyrus, Something Beautiful, 2024. Endless Summer Vacation seemed like a commercial pivot back toward the mainstream after the critical success of Plastic Hearts. And it worked. Flowers became one of the biggest songs of 2023. Something Beautiful had every reason to build on that momentum. It didn't. The album underperformed significantly. The singles struggled to connect, and the era quietly faded without leaving a cultural mark. The difficult question Miley now faces is whether Something Beautiful represents a temporary stumble or the beginning of a longer plateau. After Flowers, the expectations were enormous. What came next didn't meet them. Her next move will define whether she's still a major commercial force or transitioning into legacy artist status. Harry Styles, Kiss All the Time. Disco, Occasionally. 2026. Harry's House was a phenomenon, album of the year at the Grammys, as it was dominating charts for months, a world tour that became one of the highest grossing in history. Kiss All the Time, Disco, Occasionally, was his return after 4 years of silence. And it landed like a question mark. The pivot to dance pop felt abrupt. Critics noted it sounded like an attempt to chase the Charli XCX wave without the authenticity that made that wave work. The lead single Aperture debuted at #1, then dropped steeply the following week. Reviews were divided. Fans were split between defending it and expressing genuine disappointment. It's too early to call it a full career changer, but for an artist whose last album felt genuinely era-defining, Kiss All the Time arriving to a shrug is significant. The momentum that made Harry Styles feel culturally inevitable has stalled, and the industry is watching to see if he can get it back. Outro. These albums all tell the same underlying story. Success creates expectation, and expectation is a weight that only gets heavier. Some artists recovered, some reinvented themselves completely, some are still trying to find their way back. But every single one of them learned the same lesson the hard way. One wrong album doesn't just disappoint, it reshapes everything that comes after it.